What makes Afghanistan different from its Middle Eastern counterparts is that its sightings can also be linked, at least tenuously, to ancient pre- or anti-Islamic practices, as well as the alleged sightings and even capture of one or more giant cryptid humanoid creatures, whom many associate with having an extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional origin, that being the Nephilim.
Afghanistan has long been the backdrop for myths and legends, with alleged encounters involving supernatural entities adding an eerie dimension to its history. In 2009, a U.S. serviceman reportedly encountered a giant beast with glowing eyes during a patrol, describing how it attacked his squad, leaving them no choice but to retaliate. Adding to this is the account of an elderly Afghan police officer who claimed that a race of people 20 to 30 meters tall had once roamed its rural areas, but had since disappeared in the 1930s. But most infamously is the story of the Kandahar giant, where during the mid-2000s, U.S. troops allegedly subdued an enormous red-haired hominid with 6 fingers on each hand and 2 rows of teeth.
There are many accounts of soldiers who've reported seeing massive humanoids. These stories are out there, but not many are going to come forward and admit it.
These stories, while dismissed by Afghans as just folklore or the imaginations of foreign servicemen, others state these entities are guardians of lost treasures hidden in their country's remote regions. Meanwhile, outsiders speculate they are beings from other worlds or realms, drawn there due to it being a thin spot between the natural and supernatural world, with even biblical origins. The mystery deepens with whispers of ancient cults whose rituals may have deliberately summoned, invoked, or attracted these beings. These cults are said to have sought contact with forces beyond human comprehension, their rituals perhaps serving as conduits for the fleeting appearances of these otherworldly entities. 2 such cults include one that has origins in the Hindu past of the South Asian subcontinent, and the other that may have originated hundreds of miles away to a pivotal point in history over 1,000 years ago and around the 7th century, in the heart of ancient, pre-Islamic Arabia.
For decades, whispers of a secretive order known as the Saddaqiyya have fascinated historians and occult researchers. Habib bin Musaylima, a controversial early Islamic figure, is said to have fused pre-Islamic pagan beliefs with dark historic rituals, completely contradicting the core element of the faith. His followers, later referred to as the Saddaqiya, in the 17th century Persian work Dabestan-e-Mazaheb, practiced magic seemingly tied to ancient cosmic horrors. In South Asia, their influence is believed to have merged with the notorious Thuggee cult, infamous for extremely dark ritualistic practices. Both groups are entwined in occult lore, with some theorists linking them to modern-day paranormal phenomena, UFO sightings, and interdimensional encounters. The Thuggee, active primarily during colonial India, were notorious for their ritualistic practices, often carried out in the name of Kali, the Hindu goddess of destruction, a fearsome entity that we'll explore later in this episode in connection to CERN and the Large Hadron Collider. The Saddaqiyya, believed to have emerged in Arabia and later influenced parts of South Asia, are often associated with forbidden magic, blending mysticism with rituals tied to arcane forces. Though their historical existence is debated, their alleged practices have fueled speculation about links to other secretive groups, including the Thuggee.
mystical stories of the Thuggee cult. I thought the stories were told to frighten children. Later I learnt the Thuggee cult was once real and did of unspeakable things.
In 1984, Steven Spielberg introduced the world of the Thuggee in his movie Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. They were portrayed as a cult of fanatical zealots performing dark rituals in the name of Kali, a so-called goddess of time, destruction, and death. This depiction shaped the popular image of the Thuggee as cruel devotees worshipping a powerful, malevolent force. While Spielberg's portrayal is rooted in cinematic fiction, it draws inspiration from real, albeit problematic, historical accounts of the Thuggee, whose reputation for dark rituals and their relationship to Kali is undeniably disturbing. The Thuggee were believed to have offered the entity not only their devotion, but also the lives of others. The cult's connection to Kali was central to their identity. While their violent methods made them infamous across the British Empire, the word thug is believed to have originated from this cult's reputation. Known for their brutal methods, the Thuggee were both feared and relentlessly pursued, with their eventual eradications becoming a central mission of British colonial authorities in the 19th century. While the relationship between the Saddaqiyya and the Thuggee remains speculative and rooted in historic lore, some theorists propose a shared influence. They suggest the Saddaqiya as an alleged offshoot of pre-Islamic and early Islamic mysticism may have contributed to the Thuggee's dark ritual as their teachings spread into South Asia. This connection implies a common goal, engaging with cosmic forces beyond human comprehension, whether through the Thuggee's ritualistic devotion to Kali or the Saddaqiya's purported dealings with interdimensional entities. Some theorists propose that the Saddaqiyya's influence extended into regions like Nuristan, Waziristan, and Rajasthan, areas known for their historical and cultural diversity. In this interpretation, Saddaqiyya followers supposedly merged their teachings with local mysticism and rituals, creating a hidden network. Regions like Nuristan and Waziristan, located within Afghanistan and Pakistan, have long been associated with secrecy and mysticism, with these areas also being UFO or UAP hotspots. Now, for clarity's sake, since most of you are not from the region, while often mistakenly categorized as part of the Middle East, Afghanistan is firmly rooted in South Asia, a region heavily influenced by its Hindu and pre-Islamic heritage. Despite being historically shaped by its ties to Persia and then afterwards the Arab Islamic world, Afghanistan's position as a South Asian subcontinental nation has preserved traces of its ancient culture which predate the arrival of Islam. This unique blend of influences has made Afghanistan a crossroads of civilization and a repository for both cultural preservation and whispered tales of ancient pagan entities and practices. Over the years, UAP sightings here have added an unexpected dimension to these mysteries. Recorded in local media and supported by US government declassification, these incidents describes a variety of unexplained aerial phenomena consistent with global patterns of UAP encounters at that time, with Kuwait and Iran also notably experiencing a wave of encounters between the late 70s and early 80s. However, what makes Afghanistan different from its Middle Eastern counterparts is that its sightings can also be linked, at least tenuously, to ancient pre- or anti-Islamic practices, as well as the alleged sightings and even capture of one or more giant cryptid humanoid creatures, whom many associate with having an extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional origin, that being the Nephilim. In late 1980, French journalists and explorers crossing the Afghan-Pakistan border region reported a chilling phenomenon: strange, high-intensity lights that stretched across a quarter of the sky, glowing like an unnatural aurora. According to a declassified US State Department report released in 2000, the anomaly appeared repeatedly above Ghazni, a city in southeastern Afghanistan, in August 1980, Nuristan in September 1980, and again above Khost months later, all situated in the eastern provinces of the country. Among the many witnesses, one account stands out, told by a crew led by NBC producer Joe DeCola. In January 1981, while traveling along a desolate road south of Khost, they encountered a light unlike anything they had ever seen. Stationary, unnaturally bright, and eerily silent. At first, they assumed it was a helicopter, but there was no movement, no engine hum, and no sound at all. The light remained suspended in place for over 20 minutes, its brilliance almost unbearable. DeCola's crew could offer no explanation. The light seemed to defy all logic, remaining motionless and making no noise. Could it have been suspended from a balloon, an invisible force designed to terrorize anyone who dared approach? Or was there something more sinister at play? The sightings didn't stop there. Other witnesses in remote areas like Kunar and Asadabad reported similar occurrences. Were these strange lights merely the product of military technology, or was there something darker at work, perhaps connected to ancient twisted cults, eldritch-type entities, or even the existence of giants long thought to be myth native to the region? While many local Afghans will tell you they believe in the supernatural, these beliefs are often tied to their Islamic faith, frequently referencing encounters with the Djinn and other spectral entities. However, stories of encounters with giant humanoids across various provinces are almost exclusively from US servicemen stationed in the country rather than from the locals. Why this is the case remains unclear. According to the Havoc Journal, an American online publication aimed at the veteran community, there have been multiple reports of encounters with giant humanoids in the provinces of Uruzgan, Kunar, and Koringal. Interestingly, and as an aside, while reviewing the provinces featured in this episode, we noticed a notable concentration of unexplained phenomena in the eastern regions of Afghanistan, with Uruzgan being the only exception. Eastern Afghanistan is said to have a history of shamanistic and animistic traditions that later blended with early Islamic influences, practices not wholly embraced by the religion, which may have further embedded these regions in historic lore. So before we delve into the cult of the Thuggee and their possible worship of ancient cosmic deities, let's briefly sidetrack to explore these alleged military accounts of encounters with giants, because who or what the Thuggee worshipped might be the very source of these horrors.
I was an FMV analyst from 2012 to 2018. We were doing pre-OP soak northeast of Korengal, getting patterns of life on damn near every warm body. We saw some dudes around a fire, which is completely normal, but watched to see if we could ID any weapons. After about 20 minutes, what we thought were two dudes huddled together under a blanket stood up. I mean, this guy made the rest of the dudes look like children in terms of height. He stood up and walked over to a mud hut that he had to bend way over to get in. He was at least 8 to 9 feet.
This account was taken from an FMV analyst who was stationed in Korengal between 2012 and 2018, during a time of heightened U.S. activity in the country. Their experiences, while unsettling on their own, were part of a larger pattern of foreign servicemen encountering large humanoid anomalies. Of these, 3 other specific encounters are particularly notable. But before we delve into these encounters, let's establish some historical context. An Afghan-American follower of this channel sent an email to the mysterious Middle East regarding the lingering influence of the Thuggee within contemporary Afghan folklore. He actually suggested the topic for this episode. He described regions in Afghanistan where tales of supernatural powers, allegedly possessed by secretive groups, are still told. Upon further research, we discovered that these areas are also sites of reported UFO sightings and the alleged encounters with giants described by foreign servicemen, which we will shortly examine. This might be mere coincidence, but if not, it's an extraordinary connection worth exploring. Via a voice note, he gave us the following historical context.
My family hails from Nuristan, a region where several religions coexisted into the 19th century, serving as a historical, religious crossroads of sorts. According to our oral history, a group of holy men arrived before Islam reached Afghanistan, claiming to spread the teachings of their master and prophet, Maslama ibn Habib. This religion flourished for around 60 years prior to the arrival of Islam. When Islam arrived, it arrived with caliphate military forces. This in turn forced the group to go underground, but it did not exterminate them. Eventually, they evolved into the Saddaqiyya. Elders in Nuristan and neighboring Waziristan still tell children stories warning them that the Maslama Saddaqiyya sect may come to steal them if they stay out too late at night. When I asked my parents about the group, my father said to me, Maslama was evil, empowered by his connections to Shaitan and the Djinn. He explained that the Saddaqiyya still operate throughout various regions of Afghanistan underground, secretly and covertly, as well as Pakistan and India. But we avoid speaking about them to prevent drawing any publicity to the group, which may be in turn looked at by some positively. The group promises various powers and benefits to followers, so the community does not speak of them. This connection also extends to the Thuggee in India, known for worshipping the Hindu goddess Kali, the goddess of destruction, and engaging in highway banditry, robbery, and unaliving people on the roads. My family also shares a story about Dost Muhammad Khan. This individual was the ruler of Afghanistan during the 19th century, who reportedly discovered large statues of pre-Islamic deities such as Al-Uzza and Manat, native to the Arabian Peninsula in Waziristan and Nuristan. These deities are not native to the area's pagan traditions, and my parents said the statues were part of Maslama's religion. When discovered, they're promptly destroyed. Such statues still are being found from time to time. Much of this knowledge is passed down orally, as many in the region are illiterate. My father, for instance, heard these stories from his father and his grandfather and great-grandfather. This history has always fascinated me, as it remains largely obscure outside of our region.
So, now that we've established one theoretical connection, or source, for the anomalous occurrences reported in the eastern parts of the country via these secret cults, a connection that will be explained in more detail later in this episode with regards to ancient cosmic forces, this brings us back to the alleged eyewitness accounts of encounters with giants. In 2008, while stationed in the Kunar province, a U.S. Army infantry team leader was tasked with overseeing a village suspected of being a hotspot for IEDs. The mission itself was standard: observe, report, and engage if necessary. However, this assignment would be far from routine.
I was deployed as an infantry team leader in the Kunar province of Afghanistan from 2008 to 2009. One night we'd set in on an observation patrol to overlook a village that we suspected IEDs were coming out of due to a successful IED recovery a few weeks prior. My lieutenant gave me a new thermal imaging system called the Recon 3. I started to look across the valley to what I could see, and that led me to look along the spur we were set in on, and saw a very large heat signature at the top of one of the false peaks. I did everything I could to get as clear of an image as I could, suspecting that it was a group of Afghanis huddled together around a light, as they tend to do in the mountains. All of a sudden, the heat signature stood up as one being. The trees in that area grew up to about 10 to 12 feet tall, and this thing was at least as tall, if not taller than the trees that surrounded it. It started taking steps parallel to my position and was covering ground quickly with ease. Its stride was slow and relaxed, yet it moved with incredible speed. That led me to believe that this creature was gigantic. It very quickly traversed the landscape, and I lost sight of it along a neighboring spur. I did not believe what I saw initially, assuming I'd imagined it. I never had seen anything like that in my life.
According to the Havoc Journal, which detailed these soldiers' alleged accounts, he was aware of other reports from foreigners in Afghanistan describing encounters with red-headed giants, including the infamous Giant of Kandahar story. When he shared his own experience with the journal, he mentioned the local Afghan tradition of men dyeing their hair and the hair of their goats bright orange, a practice he had initially dismissed as a cultural oddity. However, he later began to believe it was some kind of ritual rooted in the worship of these giant ancient beings. He believed these beings were known as the Nephilim. We will soon explore the validity of his theoretical connection and, in the next section of this episode, examine how the Nephilim theory ties into this and the broader mystery of the Thuggee cult and its cosmic connections. But first, let's jump ahead when another similar anomaly was reported in northern Afghanistan, this time captured through the lens of a Reaper drone.
I was a sensor operator on the Reaper in the northern parts of the country, scanning around doing my thing and looking at stuff. I found a super small mud hut, which is where I saw the giants. They were 3, maybe even 4 meters tall. There's a ruler tool that tells you how wide your crosshair is, and the people were as tall as the crosshair was wide. The few mud huts were extremely rudimentary, like just a mound with some holes for a door and windows. They didn't do anything crazy, just normal people things, tending fires and other chores. I wish I could say they did something exciting, but really just mobbed around their small clearing. There were a few goats tied up and a fire that one person was tending. Hard to tell details, but they seemed to wear rugged clothing. I would guess similar to Afghan traditional from how they moved, but they seemed heavily cloaked. The only interesting thing was the size. The goats looked like cats next to them. This was all in infrared at night, so they showed up as black humanoid heat signatures, so I wish I could have used our daytime camera. I always wondered if they had red hair, and I only monitored them for like 10 minutes before we were too far away to see.
I was an LT in the Australian Army at the time and deployed to Uruzgan province. I was on PK, what you Yanks would call security or sentry, in the early hours one morning and was scanning across the valley with a thermal imager looking for threats and saw a large human-like figure that looked different from normal because it didn't have the usual clothes the Afghans would wear. It looked like a person, but lankier. It walked behind a few compounds and I could see it from the chest up. This was when I really noticed its size. I thought it was around 600 meters away, but when I did a more detailed scan, as it was also unusual to see individual people out at that time of night, I realized it was further away. So I used the LRF to get the range and was shocked to see it was 1800 meters away. It wasn't in any hurry, and I followed it for about 5 minutes before it went out of my field of view. It was just walking. It kept looking around, especially near the compounds. I have no idea what it was, but it would have been at least 12 feet tall. I don't know of anyone else who saw anything like it. I never told anyone about it before, but it has stayed with me over all these years.
So how does this all connect to the Thuggee and other ancient cults of the Asian subcontinent? As already mentioned, Afghanistan, historically situated at the crossroads of multiple civilizations, is a country where remnants of its pagan past, influenced by Persia and India, sometimes resurface in modern beliefs and customs. So despite being an Islamic nation, shamanistic practices and even rumors of Thuggee influence still persist, despite Islam strictly forbidding magic and the worship of anyone or thing besides God. But does this persistence in the practice by a few in pre-Islamic rituals explain the theory that Afghani men worship red-headed giants by coloring their own hair red? Nope. While it may seem logical to connect the red hair of Afghan men to the stories of red-headed giants, the practice is mundanely rooted in more mainstream cultural and religious traditions. You see, in South Asia, it's common for some older men to dye their hair with henna, following the Islamic Sunnah. While similar customs of coloring livestock, particularly goats, can openly be seen in neighboring Pakistan and even in Indian Hindu festivals. This, of course, doesn't challenge the existence of giants in Afghanistan or other parts of the world. It simply suggests that the theory of Afghan men worshipping them is flawed and likely even offensive to most of them. This leads us to the question, where were red-headed giants originally recorded? In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, reports surfaced of giant skeletons being found across the US. Some of these skeletons were said to have red hair, and the giants were connected to Native American legends, such as the Saddaqiya. These beings were believed to be remnants of an ancient civilization predating modern Native Americans, possibly the Nephilim, whom Christians believe are the offspring of fallen angels, while others believe are alien who go by the same name. This explains why 21st century stories of red-haired Afghan giants often merge with that of ancient Native American lore. But how does any of this tie into the Thuggee? As mentioned earlier, the Thuggee worship Kali, a deity who, if she were to physically manifest in our world, could be perceived as a Djinn or demon in Islamic and Christian traditions, which ties her to the Nephilim, the offspring of fallen angels, or an extraterrestrial. According to the author, the late Rosemary Ellen Guiley, in her book, The Vengeful Djinn, Unveiling the Hidden Agenda of Genies, she says the following.
Demons, fairies, ghosts, spiritual possession, and even sightings of extraterrestrial aliens are believed to be the work of Djinn, or in some cases, spiritually corrupt humans who have joined Iblis.
So, within the context of UFOs and other phenomena, then we're kinda talking about one anomaly birthing multiple types of anomalies. And while Kali, or any entity taking her form, has never physically manifested in our world, there was one unusual case reported in 2018 from an unlikely place, Dublin, Ireland, that, if true, might confirm her literal existence as a real being, or at least one that assumed her form.
I went to bed, but something horrific then took over. I turned into the goddess Kali. I turned blue and my tongue was lolling out, and my life was leaving my body.
Janet Farrar, a 67-year-old Wiccan priestess, recounted to the media an NDE that occurred in January 2017, during which her heart stopped 5 times. She believed she was possessed by an entity, the very same deity worshipped by the Thuggee. She seemingly went under a physical transformation resembling artist impressions of the being. Her husband, Gavin Bone, a nurse, performed chest compressions while she was rushed to the emergency room, where doctors gave her a 50-50 chance of survival. Fortunately, Farrar recovered and the possession seemingly ended. But why would this being specifically target her? Although the news article did not delve deeply into the details of this particular instance, it appears Farrar has a history of encounters with otherworldly entities. Even though when speaking to the Daily Express, She and her husband spoke of a separate instance where they were being stalked by an Anglo-Saxon entity. To us, it seemed kind of random that a random Dubliner would be targeted by a South Asian entity with zero connections to Ireland. So we did some digging and eventually came across an interview both she and her husband conducted 5 years earlier in 2013. Speaking with the Pagan Newswire Collective, they discussed how bad colonial framing has distorted Western perceptions of Eastern beliefs. This is actually an important component of the Thuggee mystery that we will touch on in the next part of this episode. However, it is the more fantastical aspect of this entity's alleged manifestation in the real world that we will focus on now. Because in the 2013 interview, her and her husband said the following.
What you find is what you expect them to be, and what they are really like is two different things. The example I give is Cali, because Cali is not what you think. If you read all the books, when army officers were coming back from the British Raj at the end of the 19th century, they were telling terrible stories about the cult of the Thuggee, with descriptions of Cali being this terrible death goddess who was being invoked to kill British officers. You have to understand that these officers were, in many cases, bastards in Indian villages because they had no idea how to deal with the culture of that time. What the Hindus, Indians did was invoke their goddess of protection.
What many don't know about the priestesses and priests of Cali was that before you went to one of these officers with a garrote around his neck, you had to get to know them as a person. Once you had done the deed, you had to go to the temple of Kali and mourn them.
The person about to assassinate this officer knew exactly that they were doing the right thing, that it was karmically correct. Unfortunately, every bandit and criminal attacking the British was accused of being a Thuggee and devotee of Kali. When the feminist movement got a hold of Kali, they carried on this same idea, continuing the focus on this dark aspect. They just reinterpreted what the British officers were saying to fit their own philosophy, even though that was wrong. This is the problem. How deities are portrayed in books and what they're like when you meet them are two separate things.
It seems that 4 years after this interview, and we're purely speculating here, the couple may have attempted to invoke this entity or an anomaly pretending to be her, leading to Farar's transformation into it. Alternatively, she could have experienced a regular health emergency, which they later framed as supernatural. This framing may have been influenced by their subconscious conditioning shaped by long exposure to Western narratives of Kali as an evil entity, from colonial-era portrayals to Spielberg's Indiana Jones, despite their earlier rejection of such ideas. Ergo, the incident may have been misinterpreted as a manifestation of Kali, even if it wasn't. Though she is widely regarded by those outside of the Hindu faith as merely a mythological figure, it is her consort who has a more tangible and potentially dangerous presence in the 21st century. So while the true nature of the Thuggee remains shrouded in mystery, and the true nature of their threat may merely even be the product of the British in colonial India, much of the modern world knows who her consort is, and the stories of his active worship in the West, but not to summon him, but to use him as a symbolic gateway between dimensions. Who are we talking about? Well, Kali's consort is Shiva, her husband, and the organization that uses him as a symbol of their efforts to possibly bridge worlds is CERN.
In the previous episode, we explored the chilling possibility that the CERN LHC could be a portal for summoning extra-dimensional beings, invoking forces from beyond our understanding using ritualistic magic. In CERN's courtyard is the statue of the idol Shiva. Could Kali's destructive power, often tied to tearing apart the fabric of reality, be part of an ancient blueprint that aligns with modern experiments? What if the energy harnessed in these rituals could transcend the known universe, summoning beings beyond time and space, much like the extra-dimensional entities of cosmic horror? This connects to a disturbing theme in occult lore, where forbidden knowledge, ancient rituals, and the worship of cosmic entities blur the line between myth and reality. Just as the Thuggee sought to control forces of destruction through Kali, modern experiments, like those at CERN, could unintentionally open gateways to other realms, allowing malevolent forces to cross over. Could there be a cosmic link between Kali's destructive nature, the Thuggee's ritual, and the unsettling experiments conducted by organizations like CERN? These rituals, even if not practiced for centuries, may still act as psychic beacons or remnants of ancient practices, calling forth otherworldly entities, like the giants allegedly encountered in Afghanistan, or the confirmed sightings of UAPs. In recent times, however, some believes the Thuggee were entirely a fictional creation of the British. The French historian Martin van Woerkent theorized that they were a colonial invention, a type of mimetic hazard, designed to validate British rule over South Asia by transforming a mere idea into an almost tangible enemy. Others support this view, arguing that even if the cult did exist as an organic cult born from the region, its numbers and influence were greatly exaggerated. One source, a Mr. Ravindra Viswanathan, stated,
"The concept of Thuggee as a psychopathic cult was largely a colonial British invention, exaggerated to justify oppressive laws. While the British claimed that Thuggees eliminated tens of thousands of people annually, evidence was sparse, and arrests over 2 decades totaled only around 3,000. Most accusations were anecdotal, relying on coerced confessions and dubious laws which allowed for sweeping arrests, including entire families without tangible evidence. The narrative served colonial interest, demonizing rebels and justifying British control under the guise of civilizing India."
However, others claim the Thuggee were indeed a very real organization, with access to a very real supernatural power, where their idol Kali could be the avatar for a real, yet less than godlike entity that exists on another plane of reality. Beyond seeing the Thuggee in Indiana Jones, were you aware of the real historical context of their existence? And what do you think could be behind the UAP encounters, the giants of Afghanistan, and other anomalies? Folklore and hysteria? Quranic or biblical entities? Or actual aliens? Sound off in the comments, like and share, and inshallah, we'll see you in the next one.